Hello everyone. Today we'll be discussing Chapter 2, the rationale for public participation. There are two objectives in this lecture. Number one, list some of the benefits of public participation, and number two, identify characteristics of effective public participation. The main question of this chapter is why public participation views are an integral part of democracy itself. As a reminder, democracy is the rule of the majority or the rule of the people as opposed to the king and the queen. Today, most democracies are representative, so we elect people to make decisions for us or on our behalf. We also hire people in government. These are government employees who make a lot of decisions that actually affect our everyday life. Part of the idea of democracy is that you can elect the officials that will represent you, but there's a lot of delegated responsibilities to decide public planners or public employees. These employees make these very important administrative and legislative decisions, so they make laws, regulations, and changes. Of course, at the end, they are approved by City Council and by the mayor, but they're the ones making very important recommendations that affect the public. This is why it's so important that the planners themselves actually seek public engagement from residents. During the early era of planning in the 1930s, but closer to the 1950s, rational planning was a big paradigm that was proposed by planners and other technocrats. So the idea is that they will make scientific decisions and they will use techniques that will maximize efficiency. So the decisions could be capture the public interest, and we really meant that the greatest good for the greatest number. And this is a quote that is attributed to Jeremy Bentham, who is the founder of utilitarianism. Again, it is the greatest good to the greatest number of people, which is the measure of right or wrong. Planning tends to be very utilitarian profession. It's also very practical. It's driven by checklists and process established by government bodies. The general idea here is that we need technocrats and experts because it makes sense to delegate power to planners and to elected officials. It is more effective that if citizens were doing the plans. The idea of rational planning became again popular more in the 1950s. During this time, there was a lot of optimism for the power of science to be able to solve problems. After the Great Depression and World War II, there was a lot of this optimism, but that really propelled the idea of modernity. So for example, the airplane became commercialized during this time. People can go and see the world in a different way than when they did during using boats. There was the mass production of cars, which meant that if you build highways, people could live in more suburban areas. So modernism was the idea that human invention can solve economic, social, and physical aspects of urban problems. When we might think about planner in the modernist era, we might think of Robert Moses. And Robert Moses was a master planning builder in New York City, and he planned for urban renewal, clearing up spaces so that developers can move there and develop property that otherwise would be too hard to develop because they would be owned by different property owners. So by eminent domain, a power of the state, they actually assemble land for big developers, including campuses, hospitals, and other types of developments, including housing. And the area was like clear up of it was determined to be blight, which means places that were poor, places that were low income, and the idea of like removing these blighted places was also called Negro removal, because it really displaced a lot of African American black communities, and instead highways were built in the place of these older communities, and public housing, which were mostly in the form of like very tall towers in green spaces. So towers in a form of a garden were built, Le Corbusier style, which was like a French architect that really thought that these social problems and economic problems that cities were experiencing could be solved through design. So all the modern ideas, this is what the planner, architect, technocrat thinks, that he or she could solve these problems through methodology, in this case the planning methodology, or cleaning blight and building new communities in its place. In 1955, Meyerson and Banfield wrote a book titled Planning, Politics, and the Public Interest. And this book argued that planning should be efficient with resources, it should be reproducible, and it should be objective. They also said that a structured process of decision making that seeks to maximize achievement of desired goals, that is the ends, by careful consideration of potential consequence of available alternatives, that is the means. So in other words, I was saying that the ends justify the means, and this is why urban renewal was like so popular as a tool for planners. But we all know that that resulted in displacement and in massive inequalities. So the rationality here focuses on the quality of decision, or the subordination action to knowledge, and of knowledge to values. So it was also thought that rational planning was unbiased, was completely objective, and it didn't require any value judgment to make these decisions.